All right. Thank everybody for being here. Keep dropping your name, keep dropping your county. We appreciate you, but we are going to get started in about, actually, I'll just get us started now. My name is Imani. I'm the communications director at 482 Forward. We are a steering committee of MEJC, which you'll learn just a little more about if you don't know what MEJC is in just a few minutes. And I want to welcome you to our 2026 Michigan State of Education Town Hall. Round of applause if we were in a real room. Tonight, we hope to demystify the current public education landscape, both nationally and also right here in the lovely state of Michigan. We want to give you the facts about how our schools are funded, how we can protect student civil rights, and also what's at stake right now. We want to think together about what steps we can take to protect our public education system. But before we get started, I'll pass it to Henry to tell you a little bit more about MEJC.
Thank you, Imani. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Imani. Hi, everyone. My name is Henry Duong. I am the organizing director at Rising Voices. Rising Voices does Asian American power building and advocacy across Michigan, and we are also a proud member of the Michigan Education Justice Coalition. But first, who is MEJC? The Michigan Education Justice Coalition is a statewide coalition of community organizations dedicated to organizing and advocating for Michigan public schools. We envision a school system for our state that is anti-racist, inclusive, and fully and equitably funded, no matter what a child's zip code is. We have two primary campaigns. Um, the Healthy and Healing Community Schools and the school funding group. Next slide. Uh, our school funding work is guided by MEJC School Funding and Revenue Committee. These are leaders in various organizations across Michigan that use community and school funding expert input to make sure school funding in Michigan is equitable and led by parents and student voices. Our Healthy and Healing Community School is likewise guided by community stakeholders and experts on school discipline, culture, and student well-being. And this is a list of our members across the state. Um, we are proud to have folks in the UP, Southeast Michigan, on the west side, Central Michigan. So thank you all for being here today, and I will pass it over to Rochelle.
Good evening, everyone. I am Rochelle. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director at the Michigan Education Justice Coalition. I'm a mom of two, and I'm joining from Northern Macomb County, Shelby Township. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy lives to be with us this evening and to learn a little bit more about where we are in education right now in Michigan. The Michigan Education Justice Coalition could not hold an event about the attacks on public education and liberty in America without first acknowledging what is happening currently across the country. We've all heard the story of Liam Conejo Ramos, and thanks to the advocates on the ground in Minnesota with Liam's teachers and all of you who lent your voices to advocating for Liam, he has been released and he is at home in Minnesota right now. In Michigan, students at Plymouth Canton High School, Lance Cruz High School South, Cass Tech, and many other schools are leading walkouts to bring awareness to what is happening to their fellow students who are being detained or who have parents who are being detained. We believe, and we all know that the bottom line is that children cannot learn if they don't feel safe. Schools cannot be the centers of our communities if they are used as locations to round up children and their parents. While our educators are doing all they can do to protect our kids, we also have so much more to do. Right now, I want to take the time to recognize the individuals who have been killed at the hands of ICE in just 2026 that we know of who have been in the news. I ask you to join us as we say their names, and then we will follow with a moment of silence. Keith Porter, Renee Good, Alex Preddy, Alunas Campos. We say their names and we will follow with a moment of silence. Now here comes the action part. I have things for you all to do. We're going to put some links in the chat so you can help protect our neighbors right now. The first link is to demand that Senator Peters and Senator Slotkin defund ICE. Right now, Congress is voting on the budgets to determine the DHS and ICE funding for the following year. They need to hear from us to know that we want to defund ICE. Someone's going to be putting the link in the chat right now so you can take action as we're going along this evening. The second link is from our partners over at Rising Voices, who are collecting signatures to ask the Michigan Senate to vote on Senate Bills 508, 509, and 510, which would make certain locations like schools safe zones from ICE. It also prohibits state offices from sharing sensitive data with ICE without a judicial warrant. And finally, Senate Bill 10 would prohibit law enforcement officers from wearing masks to hide their identities. We also are going to share a link really quickly to something that's happening right now in Detroit. The Meager Watch is going to be training folks this weekend on how to be better partners and protect community members from ICE, and it's going on at St. Peter's Church on Trumbull in Detroit. And so I want to thank you all for this moment of recognition and breath that we know to acknowledge what we know is going on right now. And throughout the evening, we are going to continue to drop actions that you can take right now to address all of the things that we're talking about here. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rochelle and Henry. And just again, thank you all so much for being here to have these really important conversations. Healthy communities require safe, healthy, healing, fully and equitably funded public schools. So now we're going to hear from a coalition member from the Michigan League for Public Policy to tell us about the resources that we need to give kids in Michigan the education they deserve. Alex Stamp, I'm passing it to you.
All right, thank you so much, Imani. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Alexandra Stam. I am the Education Policy Analyst at the Michigan League for Public Policy. One of our major priorities here at the League is ensuring that our state budget meets the needs of all Michiganders. Public education is a cornerstone of a healthy democracy. It equips our young people with the knowledge, critical thinking, and civic skills to participate fully in our communities. Public education promotes equal opportunity across backgrounds, and it helps produce an informed electorate that can hold our leaders accountable. Investing in strong public schools is an investment in our collective future and the health of Michigan's democratic institutions. I am sure that many of you remember last year's contentious and very much prolonged budget season. After negotiations and advocacy efforts, the final school aid budget was, generally speaking, a win for Michigan students. We saw increases in the foundation allowance and increases to important categoricals, such as funding for our English language learners and our at-risk students. That being said, the budget process itself, especially an irresponsible House budget proposal that cut funding for vulnerable groups, raised red flags that have advocates concerned as we approach work on the fiscal year 2027 budget. After this month's consensus revenue estimating conference, we now know that there will be less revenue to work with in budget negotiations. Even with downward revenue projections and budget cuts looming, Michigan House leadership and groups like Axe My Tax are calling for property taxes to be reformed or eliminated entirely. Property taxes comprise 15% of the state's budget for K-12 schools. And no, the lottery is not going to make up the difference. Tax cuts are cuts to our schools' ability to pay for the education our students are entitled to. The state has a revenue sufficiency problem that must be addressed further, highlighting the need for the Invest in My Kids proposal to make it to the ballot. Okay, good. Thank you. As the budget process unfolds, MEJC will remain focused on advocating for adequate and equitable funding for Michigan schools. Our top priorities this year are focused on targeting funds to students most in need. Transparency and accountability have been talking points of many national and state leaders, and we want just that. We want to ensure that state dollars are going where they are most needed and directly, positively impacting the educational experience of all of our students. These asks come from collaborative work with partner organizations, and they are driven by community input and backed by research. First, we asked the legislature to increase at-risk funding by 25%. In 2023, Michigan became one of the first states to allocate at-risk dollars according to a new formula that we call the Opportunity Index, which dedicates more funding for students in schools with higher concentrations of poverty. The Opportunity Index was developed based on what leading high-performing states in a growing body of research say is needed to close opportunity and performance gaps for students from low-income backgrounds. Despite this new formula and increases in the funding, the Opportunity Index is just partially funded through prorated weights in the budget. It's critical that we continue to invest our dollars in these students. Second, we ask for the legislature to increase equitable funding for special education. For far too long, Michigan has underfunded and inequitably distributed special education resources, forcing local districts to divert general education funds to meet their legal obligations under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Recent budgets have been a good first step in investing for students with disabilities, but now it's time for Michigan to move from short-term fixes to a systemic reform. The Michigan Special Education Finance Reform Blueprint, developed by education leaders, advocates, and researchers, provides a comprehensive plan for funding special education services according to student need. The blueprint has the potential to take Michigan from one of the lowest ranked states for special education outcomes to a leading state for funding equity. The legislature should prioritize adopting this new funding model and invest in special education funding, an investment that will positively impact all of Michigan students. As a former public school teacher, I can vouch for the need for more investments in these areas. The effects of underinvestment showed up in my classroom in the form of leaky ceiling tiles, books held together with duct tape, classrooms overfilled with students, but missing service providers like special education teachers and paraprofessionals. My experience is not unique or even an example of a struggling school district. Now, as a policy analyst and a member of MEJC, we are working to make sure that our classrooms are the reality that we want for our students. If you would like to join us in advocating for these priorities and more, come to Lansing on Thursday, March 19th. We will speak with members of the House and Senate about the importance of allocating funds for resources like mental health supports to keep our students ready to learn and targeting funds to the students who are most in need. We need you. We need parents, caregivers, educators to help us remind our legislators that our students are worth the investment.
Thank you so much, Alex. And hopefully y'all are hearing the very powerful stories and also data that backs up the stories. By working together, we have had some wins, but we also know that right now there are threats to the idea of public education for every single child in Michigan. How do we protect our students in this environment? Well, today, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel is here to tell us about what her office is doing to protect the right to a quality public education for all children who live here. As you're listening, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and she'll try to address them as she can.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Fantastic. Well, good evening, and thank you to the Michigan Education Justice Coalition for inviting me to speak on this call. Look, I know it's been a really rough year for our schools. We've seen abrupt funding cuts, curriculum policing armed officers storming the bus lines at the final bell, and really to say nothing of the general upheaval that's been impacting American healthcare, infrastructure, food assistance, and so much more. So I spoke to a group of school superintendents a few weeks back who told me any problem society fails to address winds up landing in a teacher's lap. And we know that's true, right? We've seen it happening in real time every day for the last 12 months. But I'll say, despite all the chaos and the confusion that we're seeing at the federal level, I do want to take this opportunity to reinforce that the Michigan Department of Attorney General, we have a commitment to upholding the promise of public education in America. Every child in this country deserves the chance to build a strong foundation that sets the tone for the rest of their lives. And my department has been and will continue to fight tooth and nail on behalf of our state's children, families, teachers, and schools to ensure they have access to the same rights and resources that they've always been entitled to under the law. Now, my department has, as of tonight, we have filed 45 lawsuits against the federal government since President Trump retook office for a second term in January of last year. And I want to be clear about this. These are not simple policy disputes. Now, I might not like it. I may not have voted for him, but we have to acknowledge that Donald Trump is the duly elected president of the United States. And with that, it gives him broad authority to enact his agenda. But, and here's the key, he has to do so within the boundaries of the law. So when the federal government, one, violates the Constitution or federal law, and two, creates a concrete, demonstrable harm to either the state of Michigan or the people of the state of Michigan, it is my sworn duty as the state's attorney general to fight back. And that's the justification really behind all 45 of our department's lawsuits. And the courts have generally been pretty sympathetic to our arguments. Now, we've managed to secure injunctive relief, meaning a judge has ordered the federal government to stop whatever action they were doing that we protested against in more than half of our cases, 23 of our 45 cases. We've outright won about a quarter of them, 12, either because the courts ruled in our favor or simply because filing the case was enough to get the Trump administration to back off and retract their bad action. And to date, we have recouped well over $2 billion, billion with a B, in Michigan taxpayer money that was wrongfully withheld from critical programs our residents rely on, including in our public schools. And I'm proud of our successes. We have preserved $25 million in grants awarded and owed to the Michigan Department of Education and local districts for the improvement of school health and safety infrastructure. In response to our filing in a separate case, the Department of Education released $171 million in Michigan's title funds that they'd arbitrarily and unlawfully frozen. The DOE's attempt to present a new and legally incoherent interpretation of Title IV was also rejected, allowing for the regular distribution of nearly $1.3 billion in school funding in Michigan. And our department saved the mental health grants that fund school counselors, social workers, and also psychiatrists. In November, a judge permanently blocked the dismantlement of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the agency that foots the bill for about 75% of the state's library programming, school, local, academic libraries, and without which the state could not have run our MELCAT interlibrary circulation system. So in addition to that, we're actively fighting the Department of Health and Human Services attempt to strip funding from the longstanding sexual health education programs that combat teen pregnancy, the spread of STIs, and most recently, illegal terms and conditions tacked onto Title IX funding for federal health, education, and research initiatives. But, you know, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to say everything's been smooth sailing. So back in March of last year, following Secretary of Education Linda McMahon's announcement, otherwise known as the wrestling lady, is what I like to call her, that they'd be laying off over half of the staff at the Department of Education. My office filed suit to preserve that agency, and initially we secured a preliminary injunction. However, that was overturned by the Supreme Court in July through their shadow docket, meaning they didn't give any explanation at all for doing that. So the case isn't over, but the Supreme Court, you know, while they didn't rule on the merits, it had a very detrimental effect, obviously, on DOE. My department filed an amended complaint in January, and we're going to continue to argue that you cannot dismantle a congressionally created agency without an act of Congress. So in the meantime, you know, the federal government has given the green light to fire thousands of hardworking public servants, including all the staff, everyone at the Cleveland Office of Civil Rights, leaving at least 87 outstanding claims from Michigan students that were unresolved. Hypothetically, our children are still protected because our civil rights laws are still in the books, but without anybody to enforce them, it's a bit of a moot point, isn't it? So I fear for the future of bright young students who, now might have no one to turn to in their hour of need. But to paraphrase Lyndon B. Johnson, there is no room more hopeful than a classroom. And all that potential packed into, little lives gathered in a classroom every day to puzzle out the mysteries that make up the world around them. It is still our solemn responsibility and also our greatest privilege to provide for those students and to give them every possible advantage we possibly can. Now, we know that even the slightest disruption in a student's academic journey can lead to lifelong difficulties. And time passes, kids grow up, whether we're ready to accommodate them or not. And years of disinvestment in our public education system have sort of left us with very little wiggle room. We are definitely at a crossroads, and now is the time to act with a sense of urgency. So my department's going to continue to do everything we possibly can to fight these illegal actions in courts, to preserve the funding of our schools that they rely on, and to cultivate a safe environment for our students to learn in. But we definitely can't do it alone. So thank you for everyone who's on the call tonight. Obviously, it's first step. Tomorrow, take what you learned here and tell a friend, post about it, reach out to your elected representatives, write a letter to the editor of your local paper, make an address during public comments at your next city council or county commission meeting. But know that you have a partner in the Michigan Department of Attorney General who will have your back every step of the way, at least until January 1st of 2027 at 12 p.m. So thank you, and I appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Attorney General Nessel. We have a question in the chat about how the administration has reacted to court orders and results of states' lawsuits.
Yeah, so that's good. That's a good question. And obviously, I think there is a narrative out there that the Trump administration just has completely disobeyed all of the court orders, and it's sort of just havoc in terms of the ability to rely on a judge's order because the federal government doesn't care. That has actually not been the complete narrative has not really been true in my experience. So for the most part, the Trump administration has complied with the court orders. Now, I will say that sometimes it's slow getting there, right? So let's say that there's money that was paused or illegally terminated, and then we win the lawsuit, or we get a preliminary injunction, and the judge says, you got to send the money to Michigan, or you got to send the money to these school districts or to MDE or whatever. Sometimes it's not right away. Sometimes it's not immediate like we would like it to. But again, Trump has really made a complete mess out of what is left of our federal government. And so a lot of times when you have like half the people at an agency that are fired, they don't even know who the right person is who can administer the distribution of those funds, or even what account they're in, things of that nature. So they are largely complying. Sometimes we have to file a motion to enforce an order or a second motion to enforce an order. But eventually, the administration has been complying. And let me give you a non-education related example of that. I mean, does anybody remember when the National Guards had been federalized and taken over cities in Los Angeles and Portland and Chicago? I mean, what happened to that? Well, the states filed lawsuits and they won in court, and then they left that night. So I know it feels like they're totally disobeying court orders, and oftentimes they are, but I think for the most part, it's not that they are intentionally trying to circumvent the order so much as everything is just a mess all the time. And as that DOJ attorney said that maybe several people here saw it when she was just like, hey, like my job sucks. It's impossible to work with our agency. They're making all kinds of administrative errors. And could you please hold me in contempt for 24 hours so I could go to jail and get some sleep? I mean, she's frustrated because she's trying to do her job, and she can't because in so many of these agencies, they've laid off so many people, they've fired people, people have quit, people have resigned. So sometimes the mess is more just general incompetence than it is an intent to circumvent the court's order.
Thank you so much for all of your time, Attorney General Nessel. We don't take it lightly. I know that there are more questions in the chat, and if it's okay with you, we'll send them to you, and maybe you can email back responses, and we can send them to everyone who was here tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for
Awesome.
having me.
Awesome. Thank
Have a
you
good
so
rest of your
much for
night.
joining us. Let's get some hearts in the chat for Attorney General.
Thanks,
And
guys.
thank you. Now we are going to hear from those that are directly impacted by the lack of investment in our schools. We're going to start with students, but we also have a few parents as well. So I'm going to kick it off with Ji.
Good afternoon. My name is Ji-Yoon Ko, and I'm a student in Ann Arbor Public Schools and the co-chair of the MEJC Youth Collective. Here is the reality for students. For students struggling with gender dysphoria, the chances of receiving support at school are painfully low. According to GLSEN, nearly 70% of gender diverse and transgender students feel unsafe or isolated at school, and many experience serious mental health distress. At the same time, about half of LGBTQ+ students say their school does not provide the mental health support they need. The truth is simple. Mental health support is not where it should be. I attend Ann Arbor Public Schools, which is considered better resourced than many districts in Michigan. Even here, my high school has over 1,700 students and just one social worker and one nurse. 1. National recommendations are closer to one counselor for every 250 students. Schools are not equipped to meet students' everyday mental health needs. As an immigrant and a lesbian, I have needed more support than my school can offer. I do not live with my parents, and when I am overwhelmed, school should be a place of care. Instead, students are often left to rely on each other. If it were not for my friends, I do not know where I would be. Schools tell students that help exists, but expect students to seek it out on their own. When students are overwhelmed, school should be where support meets them, not another place where they're left to figure it out alone. And this is not just Ann Arbor. Across Michigan, students are struggling, especially in districts with fewer resources. If this is the reality in a well-resourced district, imagine what it looks like everywhere else. We cannot talk about educational justice without talking about mental health. Funding counselors, social workers, nurses, and inclusive mental health services is not optional. It is essential. Students are asking for help, and it is time to start answering. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji-Yoon. And also special thanks for being here right before your test. Awesome. We love our Michigan students. And now I am going to pass it, I believe, to our parent, April.
Sure. Hi. I am speaking to you today. I am a elected school board member in Hazel Park, Michigan. I am also the parent of a child with special needs who receives special education services through their school. And I just want to talk a little bit about the funding, both at the federal and the state level, that impacts those of us that are making decisions for our schools and also our students that are attending. And it is that the thing about special education is that it is expensive. Children require a lot of resources on a daily basis. Children with disabilities require more, and their need for an education is not just it's a civil right that is available to them. So special education primarily is funded through the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is better known as IDEA. And IDEA was passed truly not that long ago. Our our parents, this was barely a lifetime ago, were not guaranteed the right to an education if they had disabilities. So we are not far removed from a time when this civil right was not available. And the original plan for IDEA was to cover 40% of the excess costs of educating students with disabilities. And right now, the actual federal share is significantly lower. Um, that's last time I knew for sure it hovered around 13% in the state of Michigan. I think it's probably still the same. And what that means is that the states and local entities like property taxes and things like that are made to make up the difference. And what we know about education funding in Michigan is that it is not equitable across zip codes, let alone for children with disabilities. And that makes it very, very difficult for districts to plan for the support that is needed. Special education is not something that's nice. It is a legal right. It is a mandate. And when IDEA isn't fully funded, it really is those of us at the local level that pay, um, literally and figuratively. This particular year in Michigan, we also ran into a really large challenge at the administration and the school board level where the state of Michigan passed their state budget incredibly late. District across the states kept up their end of the bargain. They passed their budgets on time, and those budgets were optimistic guesses at best. We had no idea what our per pupil funding cost was going to be. We had no idea what was going to be allocated to schools. It was really, really difficult. Um, what that meant was no one was able to plan ahead for extra needs of children. There was very little room for innovation. There was very little room for larger purchases like technology, um, artistic equipment, musical equipment, those ancillary things that are really necessary in a classroom in order to support our kids beyond just curriculum books and things like that. The thing about schools is that they're also expensive. Something is going to break, a roof is going to leak, those things are going to happen. There needs to be money there available to them. And when the state doesn't know what they're going to provide to our students, that money sort of needs to be hoarded, so that those emergencies can be funded, and it leaves very little room for planning and anything that's really going to benefit kids in the classroom. And I will close with just telling you, I ran for school board. I was elected to my school board based on some of the needs of my own children, and it really got me involved in education. And as you're sort of listening to these issues that we're talking about, I would encourage you to keep an eye on agencies like MEJC that offer some, tips and tools for you, and consider running yourself.
Thank you so much, April. Shout out to you. Also being just such a great advocate for your child. Thank you. Next, I'm going to pass it to Nafisa and Renaya, who also are representing 482 Forward, the organization that I'm with. Shout out to Nafisa and Renaya. Let's hear from you a little bit.
Hi, I'm Renaya,
And hi, I'm Nafisa.
and we're coming to you from Detroit. We're both high school students and have seen firsthand how our friends are worried about their families. Our friends are in panic mode, missing school because they're afraid to leave their families, and they're often taking on the role as their parents' protector.
Students who are citizens but their parents are not living in constant fear because of language barrier. They worry because ICE is racially profiling people speaking other languages. What happens if their families are stopped and they can't answer in English?
We find ourselves comforting friends every day, and we're just heartbroken. On January 30th, Casinico High School enforced a youth organized walkout where thousands of students walked out in solitude and their immigrant peers, protesting against ICE, protesting to their fellow peer safety.
Being in high school, we worry not only about safety and security, but our future. We have both experienced way overcrowded classrooms, outdated curriculums, not enough teacher or support staff.
In my school, there aren't enough teachers for advanced classes like AP. There aren't enough chairs. The classroom is crowded that we're getting pushed through radiators, and I have to stand during class. Our teachers and counselors are overwhelmed, so students like me who want to take AP are getting pushed aside. Even alternatives like dual enrollment are hard to take when you're taking care of your siblings and family members.
I worry that we won't be as prepared when we enter college, not to mention having to take more classes because we won't have as many AP or IB credits.
Certain schools don't have after-school activities or counselors available to help us with college applications. Certain schools don't even have career prep classes and up-to-date curriculums.
We need more funding for our schools and better pay for our teachers. We don't have enough certified teachers, so sometimes we have long-term substitute teachers and then we fall behind in the course.
We need more counselors and after-school programs. We need more teachers who are valued enough to be being paid for a living wage for a hard job.
Strong schools don't come for free. We need to know that adults around us care enough to invest in our future. We appreciate that the State Board of Education passed a resolution affirming the need for child safety, educational stability, and human dignity in all decisions related to immigration enforcement and intergovernmental cooperation. Michelle Robinson will speak about this now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be with you tonight. My name is Mitch Robinson. I was elected to the State Board of Education in 2022. In my day job, I'm a professor of music education at Michigan State University, where my research has focused on education policy. Before that, I was a high school music teacher, a coach, and an administrator for 10 years. I ran for the state board because I was sick and tired of the attacks on public education. Attacks on our children, our teachers, and our schools. These are targeted attacks against the children and communities who need our support and protection the most. Children in underfunded rural and urban schools, LGBTQ kids, and students with disabilities and special learning needs. Precisely those children who are the most vulnerable. The vast majority of American parents and voters believe that the schools their children attend are doing a good job, and they want them fully funded by their tax dollars. They also want those schools to be safe, places where their children feel accepted and valued. While that certainly means places that are physically safe for children and the adults who work in those schools, I want to take a little bit of a different approach to safety here, an educationally safe approach. What does that mean? Well, we need schools to be places where kids feel valued for who they authentically are. That includes people who come here from other countries looking for a better, a safer life. It includes children, teachers, and other support staff who are members of the LGBTQ community who can see themselves in the lessons taught in schools, the books they read, and the stories that are told. It also means making sure that our history and social studies courses include truthful and accurate information about our nation's past, including the ugly parts. And it includes children who are disabled or learn differently than their peers, who just want to be treated fairly and provided with the supports they need to learn and grow. I saw an article the other day that mentioned that President Trump's favorite word is tariffs. Well, my favorite word is public. Public schools, public service, public parks, public universities, public libraries, public health, public transportation, and public institutions. I believe that Democrats need to reclaim the high ground on public education and that support for public institutions like our schools can be a winning issue for the Democratic Party in the next election cycle. So, if we truly want to return to being the party that supports public education, how do we do that? Well, I would start by reducing or eliminating the number of standardized tests that children are required to take and restoring music, art, physical education, and media taught by certified specialists to school curriculums. I would also urge more support for teachers' unions. It's no coincidence that the states with the strongest public schools also have the strongest teachers' unions. And let's maintain our state's constitutional ban on religious and private school vouchers. School choice has nothing to do with the freedom to choose. It's about defunding public schools, crushing unions, and taking public tax dollars to subsidize religious and private school tuition. And if we're really serious about making our schools safer, then let's increase the
Well,
number of
remember,
nurses. Hello?
I'm the one that talked you into it. This marriage is because you listen to my godly wisdom. Because I said, Charity.
Plus, because I think we need to mute someone, but Mitchell, you're good to continue.
Well, Mitchell, you have to
You're on mute now.
Sorry. Am I back?
Yes.
So I was saying, if we are really serious about making our schools safer, then let's increase the number of nurses, psychologists, social workers, counselors, and other mental health professionals in our schools. Our schools must be safe and welcoming places for all children and the adults who support their learning. We need our schools to reflect not just what our communities are, but what we hope they can become. And to do that, we need every voice represented, especially those voices that have been silenced and marginalized by the loudest, most strident voices in our society. Because as every music teacher knows, the choir sounds best when every voice is heard. That's why the work that all of you are doing is so important. Using our voices to tell the leadership in Washington and in Lansing to stop the attacks on our children, our schools, and our communities. Thanks again for inviting me to be here with you tonight, and thank you all for what you do for our community and our state.
Thank you so much, Mitchell, for that super helpful and important update. Can we just get some reactions in the chat and on the screen for everybody who has joined us tonight so far? Parents and students and elected officials, we just want to thank you for spending your Wednesday evening with us, having this really important conversation. Now, I would like to introduce Moira Kalita of the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools to talk a little bit about the federal context of education right now. And we're almost to the end, so let's clap it up for Moira as she comes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. It is an amazing lineup of speakers y'all have here tonight. So impressed, especially with the students and their bravery and their stories. But I am Maura Kalida. I am the National Director for the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. We're a national coalition of which MEJC and 482 Forward and some of our other friends here are also a part of as well. And tonight I just want to give you a quick rundown on our federal landscape. So as you probably experienced, last year was chaotic. It was chaotic, it was scary, and we had to put up a lot of fights. In February of last year, President Trump came out with a proposal to cut $12 billion out of the education department, and with the goal of, dismantling the entire Department of Education. We went through funding freezes. We went through rescissions where they held money that was supposed to be released. And, y'all had AG Nessel on here who was part of some of those lawsuits that really helped us fight on those areas. We had mass layoffs at the Department of Education. Another one that was mentioned earlier, especially within the Office of Civil Rights, who is responsible for upholding the civil rights within our schools. We had the rescission of the sensitive locations guidance that had been in place for many years around keeping schools and hospitals and religious institutions free from ICE presence, right? And then we saw the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which, as part of that, put in a federal voucher program that'll really go into full effect in 2027. But as bad as some of these things were, we fought back and we had wins in there. We got those funds released. We got folks hired back, and we fought that voucher program could have been so much worse and included capital gains and unlimited tax breaks for billionaires, right? We fought and we won that. So sometimes when it doesn't feel like we're winning, we really are. And that was because folks like the people on here took action. You made phone calls to legislators, you went to DC, you showed up, and that mattered. And so we have been continuing that push that started in February of last year that is just wrapped up this week. With our federal budget for education that will take us through September 30th of this year. And in there, what did we win? We won no cuts. And that's really big, going from $12 billion that was supposed to be removed to really retaining and actually bumping our budget just a little bit in some critical areas. So, for instance, we won, instead of decreases to Title I and IDEA and segmenting it off into block grants, we won $20 million increases. Federally, that's pocket change, but we'll take that over the cuts, right? One thing not mentioned on here that I know Michigan is so proud to work on are community schools. We retain that $150 million in grant funding that's available to schools federally. We're going to have to continue to fight to keep it and to make it accessible for all of our districts, but that's really important. And we preserved funding for English language acquisition and migrant education. Harms and attacks on the immigrant and refugee communities that were, proposed earlier. And really important in what passed this week is an amendment, we'll call it a note within the budget, that really makes it explicit that President Trump does not have the ability to dismantle the Department of Education. It's on Congress, and so he should not be moving departments around. And that's particularly talking about IDEA, that I think April had mentioned, that, protecting our students with disabilities. So we're really glad that clause got in there, and that wouldn't have happened without action from the ground. If we can go to the next slide. And so I want to give you like a 2-minute spiel on what to look out for this coming year. In February, probably more like March, because the State of the Union is a little late this year, Trump will release his skinny budget again. This is what I just talked about that we just wrapped up this week from last February, that will be his proposal for how much funding we should get. That's going to be a moment that we need to rally together around. The DHS continuing resolution that was passed this week expires on February 13th. There is so much money in that One Big Beautiful Bill Act particularly for ICE, that they could run for 10 years without finishing this budget. So I want to make that really clear. So our demands have to be clear, concise, and to the point, and what we need right now. So we have an opportunity that I know MEJC is going to share in the chat to really go after our elected officials and ask them to reinstate those sensitive locations. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This should be an easy decision to keep kids safe. And the last thing that I want you all to look out for is that the federal tax credit voucher that I just mentioned. There is a potential in that budget if this is really promoted by the privatizers, by your Betsy DeVosses, to push this out and really hurt our state and our federal budgets, right? So these are tax credits that might be now $1,700 a person for a tax donation to an SGO, a scholarship granting organization, but they get 100% tax return. Prior to prior to the advocacy, this was unlimited. So folks like Betsy DeVos, Jeffrey Yass, the Koch brothers could just have dumped millions of dollars into this. This was something we stopped, but we still have to watch out for. And it can happen here. And you guys have a chance to stop that here as well. We're telling governors across the country to stand up and opt out of this scheme, because a voucher is a voucher is a voucher, no matter what you call it. So we'll drop another link in the chat to tell Governor Whitmer to opt out of this scheme, this voucher scheme. And we'll continue to stay connected to Michigan and to all the work you're doing there to help fund our schools and to fight for kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moira, for your time. And Rochelle mentioned it in the chat, but I'll mention it for the recording, that she's here today with EROS, which is a national organization. And we're very grateful for her being here. Things may seem bleak right now, but we actually have to take action in order to start feeling hopeful. We have things that you can do right now to join the movement for Michigan public schools that work for all of us. So I'll just name a few. On February 23rd, we will have the first date of a training on how to run for school board. We want people to know who will serve on their local school boards and organize for education policies in their districts that are equitable and inclusive. Being on a local school board is an impactful way to take leadership in your school district. And if you can't make this date, we actually will hold another training once a month all the way till June. March 19th, we're going to have our annual Advocacy Day. Advocacy Day brings our communities together at the Michigan Capitol to meet with legislators, share personal experiences, and push for education policies and budget priorities that are fair and just. We definitely want you to join us there. We will also give you the preparation that you need to work with us to help influence the laws that impact your families and communities. And on April 18th in Lansing, we are launching a new parent organizing structure to create teams in school districts across Michigan. We're looking for dedicated parents, caregivers, and community members who are leaders that want to get trained and join us in this fight for just public schools. Fill out the interest form that's in the chat if you'd like to attend. Slightly going off script here, but I want to also make sure that we mention Invest in My Kids. Invest in My Kids is a super awesome ballot initiative where we are trying to raise revenue for public schools at the same moment that so many powers that be are working to take money out of our public schools. You can help us February 14th through 28th by trying to get something on the ballot that could raise $1 billion for public schools. And I'm sure someone will pop a link in the chat for me, but we need everybody. And if you're looking for something to do, this is something that you can do right now this month to help us sustain funding for our public schools. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us tonight. Please make sure you reach out with any questions or concerns. You can email MJC at organize@myedjustice.org. And